Horror in Wales as father, 68, and at least 4 of his children die when a huge blaze rips through their farmhouse while they sleep. A single father and at least 4 of his children are feared dead after a devastating fire ripped through their farmhouse as they were sleeping. David Cuthbertson, 68, was killed in the blaze that tore through the remote home in rural Longamarch Wells, Powys, Wales in the early hours of this morning. Mr. Cuthbertson is believed to have lived with 7 children at the property, with just 3, aged 13, 12, and 10, managing to escape unharmed. It is still unclear how many people lost their lives in the tragedy, as villagers claim that a number of Mr. Cuthbertson's children come and go from the large home. Dramatic aerial photos convey the true devastation of the fire, with the farmhouse roof caved in and its interior completely gutted. Mr. Cuthbertson, who was originally from Scotland, is known to have had at least 2 wives and 9 children. He first married in 1966 and had 4 children, including a set of twins. He married again in 1982 and had 5 more children, at least 2 of whom have married and live in the same Welsh village. His last wife, Judith, moved to Greece 3 years ago. Mr. Cuthbertson lived in Hampshire before he relocated to Wales. It is understood some of the children in the house were his stepchildren. Other villagers said some of them were older and not living there permanently. Neighbors Ron, 73, and Rosemary Birchall, 68, said Mr. Cuthbertson brought up 7 children after his wife Judy suffered a stroke and moved out. The single father, known as Dave to villagers, is a former builder who was forced to retire after falling off a ladder at work and injuring his back 8 years ago. Mr. Birchall said, "We are close neighbors and Dave would always acknowledge us whether he was in the car or walking. My wife always talked to Dave, so she is absolutely devastated. I knew him as a good father and a gentle fella. My wife would say he was an exceptional father. All the other villagers are upset by this because Dave has been in the village for about 15 years. He used to be a builder but suffered an accident up a ladder, fell off and injured his back. We think he was electrocuted and it threw him off the ladder. His wife had a stroke and was incapacitated for a while. She moved away and couldn't bring up the kids. The kids were well presented and they used to pass us every day. It really is very sad." Rosemary said it's the worst day of her life. Mrs. Birchall added, "He was a single father with 7 children. They were wonderful." Another neighbor, who wished to remain unnamed, said the close-knit community had been rocked by the horrific incident. He said, "I'm in shock, the whole village is in shock. We heard about the fire but didn't know there were children involved till later on in the afternoon. We were in disbelief. It's hit my daughter hard because she has young children and it's such tragic news. It's devastating. I knew the family as I was friend with David's ex-wife, Judy. I know they had children together but she has since remarried and now lives in Greece. David had at least 3 or 4 wives and made money from barn conversions. The property was falling to bits and he converted it years ago." Ella Robinson, 65, who lived in a bungalow near the farmhouse in 2015, knew the family well and said the youngest victim could have been 6 years old. She said, "They were a lovely family and David was a good father. His current wife had moved out of the house some time ago when they split and was no longer living there. She had a stroke but has since recovered. My ex-partner previously owned the house before selling to his brother. We split and moved out of the bungalow in 2015. My ex called me last night to tell me what had happened. It's terrible news that such young innocent children have lost their lives. It is believed that one of the youngsters raised the alarm after fleeing the blaze. Speaking a press conference this afternoon, Chief Superintendent Richard Lewis said the devastation caused by the inferno was so severe that bodies could not be identified at the scene. He said, just after midnight Dyfed-Powys police were notified by Mid and West Wales Fire and Rescue Service that there was a house fire at a remote property at Longamarch Wells, Powys. Upon arrival the house was ablaze and 3 children aged 13, 12 and 10 years were able to escape. They are being treated in hospital but do not have life-threatening injuries. However, there are a number of people unaccounted for at this time and we can confirm that there are known to be fatalities. Due to the severity of damage at the scene, we are unable at this stage to identify any of the deceased or confirm numbers. Police are now speaking to relatives to establish how many adults and children were in the farmhouse when fire broke out. A villager who didn't want to be named said, the couple who loved both had children from previous marriages and relationships. There were older children living in the house but they used to come and go. It must be very difficult for the police to determine who was there at the time. It is understood the 3 surviving children have now been told that several members of their close family were lost in the blaze. Officers have spoken to the owners of the property, Matthew and Luretia Callan, who rented it to the family and were at the scene yesterday. Mrs. Callan said, "It is very emotive. We have been advised not to say anything." The family had rented the £250,000 farmhouse and small plot of land for a number of years. The property is almost a mile from the nearest main road, which caused the emergency services difficulties when they arrived shortly after midnight. Specialist scientists and fire investigators are still assessing the scene prior to further investigation. At this time we are treating the cause of the fire as unexplained. A neighbor at a nearby caravan holiday park said, "I woke up at about 2 a.m. to get a glass of water and I could see the place was floodlit by police and emergency services. There were helicopters there a bit later. We've heard a number of people died." Mid and West Wales Fire and Rescue Service said the blaze was well developed when firefighters arrived at the scene. The Welsh Ambulance Service sent its hazardous area response team, as well as 4 crews in emergency ambulances. The Brecon Mountain Rescue Team was also sent to the blaze because it was in such a remote location. Kirsty Williams, for Brecon and Radnorshire, said, "This is devastating news in such a close-knit community. I'd like to express my deepest sympathies to those affected and thank the emergency services for their assistance." Community Councillor Jonathan said, "It's a dreadful shock for this small community and our thoughts go out to the family." County Councillor Tim Van Rees, who represents the area, said, "I knew the family, not well, and I knew the father and several of the children. I have spoken to the owner of the property. He was alerted by one of the children who came to his house in the early hours of the morning. He called the fire service who went to the house straight away, but unfortunately not everybody could be saved. The family have lived in the village for some time. I've had a full description from the fire commander and they risked life and limb to see whether anything could be done, but unfortunately their efforts were not well rewarded. Speaking on behalf of the community, our thoughts and prayers will all those affected. The community will come together and do all it can for the surviving children and relations."